here to attend the webinar for career pathways of sociology graduate students. You are in the right place. So today, I'm Qiang Fu from UBC, So today, we will present research findings from a research project led by Dr. Foster and Ms. Gerhardt, okay, from Karen and Alyssa, okay. So basically, first thing, while we meet here on a virtual platform, we should take a moment to recognize the importance of the land on which we are each located. We acknowledge the territory to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in building positive relationships between nations and in developing a deep understanding of indigenous peoples and their cultures from coast to coast to coast. We acknowledge the ancestry and unceded territory of all Inuit, First Nations, and the Métis peoples. Okay, thank you. So, first thing I would like to remind you about, say, how to communicate with us. Okay, so if you want to communicate with each other, say it's not about, say, you are raising questions or in the Q&A session. Say if you want to communicate with us, you could use the chat box. Okay. So, and the information, I believe it's only visible to us, say, the panelists and and the host. And if you have any questions in the Q&A session, or you could use the Q&A, that icon, to enter your questions. Okay. So I believe you will be also able to prioritize questions, maybe from others. Okay. So these are the things that we want to mention. And also there is a new function. If you look at these, like these buttons next to recording, there is a live transcript. If you have that need, you could also turn it on. This is like a fancy option recently added by Zoom. Okay. So, now I'm gonna briefly introduce who are here with us today. So I'm Qiang Fu from UBC Sociology, and I was first trained as a demographer. Then I extended when I was in graduate school, like you guys. Then I extended my research interests to other areas like social capital, urban sociology, and the health and the big data. Okay. So before we introduce our presenters who did our real work, I want to mention it's like we also thank it's like the efforts and all the coordinating efforts from Ms. Sherry Fox, of the executive director from CSA. Okay, and without her, it's like it would be we do appreciate it's like her extraordinary contribution to this webinar. Okay, so then would be our presenters today. So first, as like is a PI of this project, principal investigator of this project, who was willing to collect all the information and do the hard work, is Dr. Karen Foster. And she's from Dalhousie University Sociology Department. And Dr. Foster is a sociologist whose research and writing spans the sociology of work, rural sociology, political economy, and historical sociology. And she has drawn on both quantitative and quant methods to study economic issues from a sociological perspective, like occupational succession in rural family businesses, housing desires among rural and urban young adults with autism spectrum disorder. Well, that's very fancy. Local economic development and the history of productivity as a statistic and concept. As generational divisions at work, young people's experiences on social assistance, and young auto migration from rural communities. Yeah, very impressive. So we also have a second presenter, Alyssa Gerhardt. So Alyssa Gerhardt, she is from Dalhousie University. She is a PhD student in the Department of Sociology. And she specializes in economic sociology and studies how personal debt shapes people's livelihoods. That's also very impressive. And how it affects their well-being and how it's socially experienced in everyday life. Alyssa's other research interests include rural sociology, political economy, and social inequality. Alyssa has worked on several research projects using both quantitative and quantitative methods, very balanced and mixed methods. Okay, so maybe now I will turn the floor to our presenters and ask our heroes who did the real work to present their research. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So we'd like to start, I'm Karen Foster. We'd like to start by thanking the CSA, especially past President Myrna Dawson, for setting things in motion and commissioning this research. We'd also like to thank the irreplaceable Sherry Fox for keeping us on track with administrative support at every step. Thank you also to Qiang for agreeing to moderate this this panel and for the kind words to get us started. So we hope that the report that we're presenting today is useful now and also that it spurs research in the future. So we'll start with a bit of context for the study. As most of you are probably aware, there has been pressure, probably since the 1980s, to increase enrollment in sociology graduate programs. But at the same time, the proportion of tenure track faculty positions at universities relative to temporary or contract jobs has shrunk. Although, as we note in the report, the tenure track career path has never been universal, the shift toward contractualization has shaped the fates of graduate students and definitely impacts their perceptions of the value of our degrees. Specifically, there's a perception that there are too many graduates from sociology programs to fulfill limited job prospects, particularly in academia. This perception is popularized in the stereotype of the PhD holding barista. But there's mixed evidence to support this perception. On the one hand, two recent reports confirm the increasing reliance on contract academic staff appointments across Canada. In 2018, more than half of university appointments were contract positions. These positions were disproportionately filled by racialized academics and women. In this regard, the labor market awaiting sociology MA and PhD graduates doesn't seem promising. On the other hand, the pathway from graduate education to a tenure track position is not the only one available, never has been. And evidence from other Canadian studies shows that overall, PhD graduates have strong employment outcomes, and after 5 years of graduation, they tend to make more than those with lower education levels. There are, though, some notable gender and racial differences in employment outcomes. For example, although women are more likely to be working in academia following their PhD, they're less likely to be tenured professors and more likely to make career sacrifices for their families. There are also some more subjective factors to consider in explaining career outcomes. For example, other studies have found that there's a cooling out process in graduate school, whereby students' aspirations change as they get closer to confronting the job market upon graduation. So in this context of changing labor market dynamics, contractualization, shifting perceptions of the academic school to work pipeline, and research that points to those more subjective factors and life course factors, we undertook our survey. So we'll move on to research objectives. So we had several research objectives for the study that we developed in consultation or collaboration with the CSA. Our first objective was to examine the career pathways and outcomes for graduates of sociology MA and PhD graduates in programs in Canada. The second objective was to inform Canadian sociology programs and the CSA about graduates' experiences in and after graduate school to highlight areas of success and areas for improvement. And finally, we wanted to avoid the idea that post-secondary education is a worker factory. You know, the point of doing a graduate degree is not just to get a job. And we heard that in the survey, but we also see that anything beyond survival depends on making an income, and work matters to people too. People want meaningful, good jobs. So we kind of took that on as a guiding philosophy for the research. We had hoped to be able to make more connections between people's experiences in graduate school and their career pathways and outcomes, but we didn't get a big enough sample to make a lot of those connections reliably. So that's another contextual piece. We launched this survey in September 2020. That is 6 months into the pandemic, when many populations, including the population of graduates from sociology programs, were beset by what other scholars are coming to call survey fatigue. So there's a lower response rate across a lot of surveys. So looking at methods to recruit graduates, we invited every Canadian university with a Sociology MA and or PhD program to email the survey link to their graduates through their alumni offices or their sociology department, or both. Most agreed, and we think that over half actually followed through based on the numbers and communications we've had. We applied for ethics approval at every single university, which is a process that we would be happy to gripe about later. The survey was also shared on social media and through the CSA email listserv. There was a mix of open and closed-ended questions, yielding quantitative and qualitative data, and in total, 225 MA and PhD sociology graduates who graduated between 2009 and 2020 participated in the study, and we had hoped for at least double that. So looking at who actually completed the survey, most of the sample, so about 60%, held an MA in sociology. Some of those people were currently pursuing a PhD in sociology. Some were employed and not planning to keep going. 24% held both an MA and a PhD in sociology, and 16% held just the PhD. So they had done probably an MA in another discipline. Approximately half of the sample were in their 30s at the time of this survey, which makes sense given that the people most likely to be paying attention to their alumni listservs and maybe what the CSA is doing as well are skew younger. Most survey respondents were women, which is common, again, with voluntary surveys. One unexpected finding is that 42% of respondents reported that neither of their parents went to university, which means that they were first generation university students and that they had been to graduate school, which was sort of surprising to me anyway. So looking at experiences in graduate school and kind of the characteristics of people's degrees, we found that a greater number of respondents who had graduated with MA or PhD from those programs reported specializing in qualitative methods. So there are more qualitative specialists in the sample. We did run some crosstabs to see if methodological specialization had any impact on career outcomes. And there were some interesting but not statistically significant relationships. So I think that that's probably an area for future research. Looking at publishing, almost all PhD graduates reported having at least one peer-reviewed publication where they were the lead author or co-author by the time they graduated, so 94%, compared to only a third of MA graduates. So that gives you a sense of what's normal publication in graduate school. Looking at labor market preparation, we looked at differences between MA and PhD sociology graduates in terms of how well they think their program prepared them for the labor market. We found that overall higher proportions of PhD graduates felt their program had prepared them extremely well for the labor market. And MA graduates' assessments were a little bit more mixed. Looking at perceptions of graduate experience, this is where Alyssa's going to take over. I was about to just steamroll right into that one. Go ahead.
Thanks, Karen. So a majority of participants either agreed or strongly agreed that their graduate experience was fulfilling, that an MA in sociology is worth doing without a PhD, and that the graduate experience helped them to find and keep employment. However, a majority of participants also agreed or strongly agreed that graduate programs produce too many graduates. There was more variation in the level of agreement that sociology graduates find fulfilling and interesting careers, and whether a PhD in sociology is worth doing if you don't want to be a professor. And finally, high proportions of participants either disagreed or strongly disagreed that if they did their degree again, they would choose a different field, and that their graduate experience overqualified them personally for jobs. So it might be a stretch, but this may point to a gap between the perception of an overproduction of grads and actual experiences. So most people feel that they personally have not been overqualified, but that significant numbers of other people have. When asked in an open-ended question about how their program prepared them or failed to prepare them for the labor market, the role of supervisors and faculty mentorship were frequently mentioned. There was a striking inequality between students who felt well supported and those who felt abandoned or alone. And these negative experiences can be compared to those who felt that they were well prepared. You can see some of this on the slide. So for example, I'm going to share one of the quotes. Quote, while it has gotten to me to where I am today, my Soc grad experience was one of the worst of my life. I would not recommend the university I went to, and in particular, the supervisor I was provided, as it was extremely harmful to my mental health. If I could go back, I would have followed a different path, end quote. Next. Thanks. Besides supportive supervisors and strong mentorship, graduates noted other aspects of their program that had helped them in the labor market, particularly developing certain skills and gaining research experience. So several skills stand out as being important in the labor market and employment, according to the participants. And these were research method skills, in particular quantitative methods, critical thinking skills, and writing skills. Quantitative methods were mentioned by both participants who had quantitative training and considered it an asset, and by those who did not have it, but entered a labor market where it was valued. So for example, quote, developing a mixed method skill set along with broader data skills was essential for my career entry and progression. In my opinion, many sociology grads do not have sufficient data skills and methodology training to meet non-academic employer hiring requirements. I've hired several sociology MAs in part-time research analyst roles, but only one had data skills and aptitude to retain to a full-time role, end quote. Participants who felt their graduate degree failed to prepare them for the labor market tended to say they had not developed skills employers wanted, and they did not receive instruction on how to prepare for the job market. Some said sociology was not a practical degree, and some said they had to search for supports and career development training on their own because they were not offered them as a standard part of their graduate experience. Despite this, almost half of respondents said that they use the skills from their graduate degree every day in their job. Participants were asked in both a closed and open-ended questions about whether their career aspirations had changed during the course of their graduate studies and why. Higher proportions of PhD graduates strongly aspired to academia at the time of their program enrollment compared to MA students, 11% of whom did not aspire to academia at all at the time of program enrollment. However, compared to the 70% of PhD graduates who strongly aspired to academia, only 35% felt strongly that they would actually end up finding a career in academia. So this demonstrates a mismatch between aspirations and the perceived likelihood of gaining this type of employment. From the open-ended questions, participants attributed changing career aspirations to thinking an academic career was not feasible, due to the realities of the academic job market. So for example, the precarity of contract jobs, competition, and lack of permanent tenure track opportunities. Some also decided that they saw evidence of a toxic work culture in academia, and they did not want to be a part of it. Some participants saw a disconnect between academia and the community or the real world, and said this drove them toward a different career path. So I'm going to share one of the quotes of someone whose aspirations had changed. So for example, of course, my aspirations changed. I was fed alive by faculty that with strong publications, teaching experience, and a good attitude, I would achieve the tenure track dream. That dream has vanished. So I'm moving on to applying to public service positions, which I know I'll hate, or admin positions in other institutions. These stories contrast with those of participants who started their programs without aspirations to stay on an academic career path, but then decided to pursue one during their studies. So this was much more common in MA programs than PhDs. So for example, quote, my aspirations changed from completing an MA as an edge on my resume to me wanting to pursue a PhD and eventually become a professor, end quote. So less common, but still notable responses for changing career aspirations were relational reasons. So for example, having children or having a spouse's career to balance, or geographical limitations, which were typically related to family or just an inability to move. Difficulty in publishing, a change in interest, and discrimination or lack of diversity in academia. And some participants also noted how universities operate under neoliberal policies and norms which resembled businesses, and they lack diversity in both thought and representation. For those whose aspirations did not change, they were either steadily focused on a specific career in or outside of academia from the get-go, or they were open to both opportunities during their graduate studies. It's important to note that there were racial and gender differences in both the closed and opened responses related to career aspirations and outcomes. So in the sample, for example, a higher proportion of racial minorities were unemployed, 20%. At the time of the survey compared to 8% of white participants. And these findings were statistically significant. And when we look at the gender differences, we can see that a higher proportion of women currently in professor positions were not tenured compared to men. And this reflects what other studies have found about academic work in general. So we have two quotes that show these different experiences. I'm going to read them. As a woman of color who does work on race, I found it difficult to see myself in an academic role due to the lack of women of color in academic roles, as well as not being made to feel welcome in the academy. And the tenure track, was an aspiration that I was aware was unrealistic. I have children and therefore limited geographic mobility, which is a requirement for a career in academia. Of the participants who were currently employed at the time of the survey, 74% had full-time permanent work. 41% of the sample who were currently employed at the time of the survey worked in non-academic sectors, while the largest proportion of those working in the university sector were currently employed in a tenure track position. So for those currently employed in a non-academic field, 28% of participants reported working in educational services, 19% in public administration, 18% in professional, scientific, and technical services, and 12% in healthcare and social assistance. And we looked at both job satisfaction and differences in pay. So a greater proportion of PhD graduates reported that they made a salary compared to MA graduates. And still overall, the majority of sample participants reported that they were paid by salary. When we look at income and the degree graduated, PhD graduates in the sample tend to make more money overall than MA graduates who were concentrated in the lower income categories. So for example, the highest proportion of MA graduates reported an income between 40 and 60,000, while the highest proportion of PhD graduates reported an income between 80 and 100,000. Overall, sociology MA and PhD graduates are satisfied or very satisfied with their work. So the highest levels of reported satisfaction were associated with feeling like they were doing something meaningful and a safe work environment. And the highest levels of reported dissatisfaction were associated with pay, the ability to move up in their jobs, and work-life balance.
Okay, so thanks, Alyssa. I'll wrap things up here. Overall, what comes to the surface for us is the value of the skills that come with a sociology graduate degree. So the research methods, writing, and critical thinking skills, most of all. This is something that many of us, speaking for faculty, emphasize and promote and should continue to do so. The importance of good supervisors comes through too. Supervisors are the connectors to opportunities and supports that graduates might not otherwise find their way to. We can also provide assessments of the labor market, connections to past graduates, our own career path stories, and so on. This is work that many of us are already doing, and it seems to be worth it. But students should also know what they should expect from supervisors, and they should be empowered to find a new supervisor if theirs isn't appropriately in their corner, or to ask for what they need and what past graduates have found to be helpful from their supervisor. Helping graduate students see and prepare for a diversity of career opportunities also seems important. As we can see from the data that we've collected, people end up in a wide variety of industries and sectors and occupations, and they mostly seem satisfied with them. So I think we can reassure our students that there are lots of options for how to use a sociology graduate degree to make a decent living and also to have a job that is satisfactory. It's also still evidently possible to get a tenure track job in the social sciences, so that door is not closed, and I think we need to make sure that students know that. But it is also possible to land any number of fulfilling jobs that draw on the skills that we teach. While a graduate degree is not strictly job preparation, students do need to earn money when they leave us. That is the world that we live in. And we faculty need to find a way to balance our social critique and our desire to be distant from the market with the future well-being of our graduates. Finally, the qualitative responses and the divergent career outcomes for racialized respondents point to structural racism, sexism, discrimination, and exclusion in the university, but within our discipline. And our survey has no way of saying how widespread those issues are, but we propose that they be taken seriously and studied further. So there's lots more data in the report itself, and we hope that people will read it, and we look forward to having a discussion about this.
Okay. Yeah, we appreciate this wonderful and fascinating presentation from Karen and Alyssa, and also their efforts in collecting the data and implementing the project. So before we move to the Q&A session, just let me remind you a few things. First, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A button, okay, or the Q&A box. And also, it's like for us to better understand your questions, it might be useful if you could mention a little bit about yourself, say your career stage and whether you're a PhD or MA student, or even say maybe it's like your preferred job, something like that. Okay, but these are not required. It's totally up to you, because it's like one thing we should remind you as well. It's like all the video will be uploaded, I believe, after this to YouTube, so that everyone will have access to this. Okay, if I understand this correctly. So yeah, please feel free to raise any questions using the Q&A box. Yeah, I guess maybe I could have the first question for our presenters who did the wonderful work. So I'm thinking it's like you know, we are still in the era of the pandemic. So what would be the possible implications of the pandemic of the COVID-19 on the job market? Should someone postpone their job search? Or it's like, is there any way we could do, say, the supervisors or the community could do to prepare our students for the job market, and how should they prepare themselves for the job market? Yeah.
I can offer
Yeah,
some thoughts. So we did ask some COVID questions in the survey, just about how COVID had impacted people's employment. And I might ask Alyssa if she remembers. I'm pretty sure it was a qualitative question. People just wrote in their responses. That's what, yeah.
So there were a couple of open-ended questions related to COVID, just depending on whether someone was employed or currently employed. So, or sorry, currently unemployed. So the first one asked what aspects of their job satisfaction maybe had changed because of the pandemic. But the second question was posed to those who indicated they weren't employed, and it asked how the pandemic was affecting their search for employment if they were looking at the time. And some of those, do you want me to share some of what I remember from that, Karen? So the big one for those who had been looking for jobs said there was a lot of hiring freezes happening, budget cuts, some that were even in the process of being interviewed. The interviews were canceled. So I think we probably will see more of that moving forward in terms of like budget cuts and things like that and hiring freezes. But Karen, maybe you can elaborate more on that.
Yeah, it's all coming back to me now. I remember that. So people talking about how COVID affected their current employment said they pointed to some work-life balance things. And there was actually an interesting, I guess, balance between people who said that they were really enjoying working from home and being able to not do their commute anymore. So like things you would expect from any field. One thing that we didn't collect data on because of the phase of the pandemic we were in, but that I think is interesting to think about, is that there's all this writing now about the Great Resignation, about people who are quitting their jobs, and it's not served. People are not just like staying home and taking in that kind of money. They're making different decisions about what to do with their lives and whether they want to work full or part-time. And so there's a lot of movement in the labor market. And I think in the university sector anyway, there's maybe not as much of a freeze as we might have expected. I think it depends on province or geography and probably discipline. But looking at my own institution, hiring hasn't slowed. It has slowed since the 1980s, but it's no worse now after the pandemic than it was before. So I don't think we know enough to know how it's going to turn out. And I would just say, like, if people listening are about to hit the labor market, I would not automatically assume that the pandemic has, devastated everything.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for these wonderful answers. Yeah, so I guess there are some activities in our Q&A box. So I will try to read these questions briefly to our presenters. Okay, so the first question is from Davina. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Okay, so she mentioned it's like she had a certain background, and you could read that. And do you have any sense if postdocs are becoming more common to sociology PhDs before moving to tenure track job? And she also learned that it's like in neuroscience, it's like pretty much everyone needs to do a postdoc first before they move to a tenure track position. So will that happen, say, in sociology? So what's your you have any answer for that, Karen and Alyssa?
Yeah, I wonder, Alyssa, you might be able to track down. I have like a sort of an answer not looking at the report, but then I think we do have the proportion that have a postdoc.
I can look at that. So we did ask who had done a postdoc, and there was, I'll double check the number while you're speaking, Karen,
Sure.
but it's possible also maybe to run, to look at like in the sample who had done a postdoc and then were on a tenure track or had a tenure track position. That's something we didn't do for the report, but it's possible to look at.
Yeah, and I think we would have, just thinking about how the sample broke down, I feel like that might even be statistically significant. Like it's certainly feasible to at least try it. But like as a faculty member now who sits on hiring committees, I would say that it is increasingly the expectation that that a person will have a postdoc. It's not necessarily that we look and say this, you need a postdoc. It's that a postdoc gives people the opportunity to publish out of their dissertation. It adds time between your PhD and your first tenure track job, and it's acceptable time. I think this is worth critiquing, but when people have left the academic career path, I think that in some hiring committees that can be like a sort of a knock against you. But if you've used that postdoc time to crank out some publications and make some more connections and maybe hone your ideas about your future research, I do think that's increasingly the expectation, and that's who rises to the top of the pile, bearing in mind that with most job competitions, departments are looking for someone to fill a particular gap. And so a lot of things have to align where your topic needs to be something that they're looking for expertise in. So this is unsolicited advice, not relevant to your question really, but is to think about how you can package and repackage your research expertise in order to fit the job ad, because that's key to getting in the door.
Yeah.
So I have the number here from the sample. So 48% of PhD sociology graduates in the sample said that they had held a postdoctoral fellowship after their degree. So whether it was completed at the time of the survey or it was ongoing. So 48% of the PhD graduates.
Right, okay.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you for the answer. So I would like to also thank Davina for raising the first question. So yeah, maybe I could add something, yeah, so that our presenters can take a little break. Yeah, so it's like, yeah, definitely it's like Karen and Alyssa's answer are in line with my observation. I also served on, it's like the faculty search committees, both in sociology and outside sociology at UBC several times. So my sense is like definitely it's like it's not really the postdoc position or postdocs that we are looking for, but it's definitely it's like publication records doesn't matter. Okay, so and sometimes it matters most. If we could put it that way. So yeah, so of course, yeah, according to Karen, so basically if you have more years to build your publication record, definitely it's easier for you to find a tenure track position, that's for sure. But another thing is like, please do not feel it's like really discouraged by this situation, because we also, it's like the flip side is like we also tend to, it's like measure your publication record by your career status. Okay, so chances are, yeah, we will not, it's like use the same bar. Say if you are like ABD, we will not use the same bar of like postdoc or even like tenure track already tenure track professors to measure your publication record. That's for sure. I believe Karen would have the same thing in Dalhousie University, right? Yeah. So that's what we do. Okay, because it's not just the postdocs. In recent years, there are also like tenure track professors. They are trying to find the other places to work. Okay, so yeah. I thank Davina for the first question. Okay, so the next question is from Zuha. So it's like, hello, I want to know which career is best for women who belong to rural areas other than education institution. So I'm not sure, say, what you exactly refer to by education institution. Do you mean like universities or like a tenure track position or some other, or including it's like also it's like maybe a high school or middle school education facilities as well. So I would assume that you mean it's like universities. So I'm not sure whether of the two presenters will have answers for that. It's like it's like
yeah, I don't think certainly nothing in the survey would give us any insights into rural career opportunities. But as we said, there are sociology graduates across all sectors and industries. In like health services stands out as being one of the popular ones. In government, obviously there are, all levels of government would be in to some degree in rural communities. There are also, depending on where you are in Canada, there are colleges and universities spread out across rural communities. I can think of a few people who've gone on to those like maybe smaller rural colleges and probably have a better work-life balance than people in larger urban institutions.
Great. So Alyssa, you want to add anything based on your observation and experience?
No, I think Karen covered it. And as we mentioned, there were a number, for those working in non-academic sectors, there were a number of industries that stuck out. And one of them was healthcare, social services, which you will find in rural areas. I think one was like any kind of scientific, technical services and public administration, all of which you would probably be able to find in a rural area. So just reiterating what Karen said.
Yeah, the other one that I can think of is like my research is in rural sociology, and I work with nonprofits and charities that serve rural areas and that are in rural areas, and they do have research needs. So if you have research skills, then conceivably you could end up working somewhere like that.
That's great. Thank you for the answers. And we also have a question from Pakistan. Okay, so I did my research on the topic causes and consequences of domestic violence against women. Could you please suggest me how this topic can be helpful for my career and what kind of topic I should choose for PhD? So yeah, that's like a very interesting question. So any thoughts? Karen and Alyssa?
So we did not delve into like the impact of a topic choice on career outcomes. So there's nothing really from the survey that I could pull out. The topic is interesting and relevant. So I feel like as a PhD topic, it would make a lot of sense. And That's the kind of thing that can be shaped and reshaped for different types of jobs, or even in interdisciplinary departments like gender studies, gender and women's studies departments. So in terms of being like a current, interesting, and flexible topic, it's already a good one.
Great, thank you. So yeah, so because I'm actually doing a little bit of research on criminology, I guess for this question, it's like for this topic, maybe you could also check it's like criminology departments in Canada, like yeah, maybe Simon Fraser University, they have a very good criminology program. Okay. Yeah, that's basically because it's like we yeah, as we know, it's like it's very hard for us to include any concrete topics in a survey, because it's like due to the sample size, if you include a list of different research topics, it's like basically you will not really have so many cases in each topic. Okay. We appreciate your understanding. Okay. So yeah. Thank you. And the next question, yeah, let me see. Is that a question? So from Aziz, is that a question? MC, for new PhD graduate postdoc application is desirable, what to do if a tenure track job is offered before starting or in the middle of a postdoc? I understand that for some postdoc fellowships, both cannot be simultaneously.
Yeah. Take the job would be my advice. Definitely don't turn down a job because you want to finish your postdoc. That would be my advice. You know, if you think about it like a filter, where this many people get a PhD, this many people get a postdoc, and then this many people get a job, it makes perfect sense to go for the job if you have it. I cut a postdoc short in order to take my job. The only thing I would say is that you can usually negotiate. You know, it seems like it's an employer's market out there, but if an employer, like if a department has selected you because you're the best candidate, they can probably accommodate some later start, and it certainly doesn't hurt to ask. You know, you're not going to lose a job just because you ask if you can start a bit later. So that would be my advice. Take the job if it's impossible to do both, but you can always ask if you're able to finish or at least get halfway through your postdoc before you start your teaching.
Yeah, exactly. So I believe we actually had this conversation with Alyssa before the session about maybe some sort of this situation. So Alyssa, if I ask you, if you encounter this kind of situation, what will you do? Yeah.
I would probably take the job.
Yeah, exactly.
It seems like a good idea.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with Karen and Alyssa. It appears to be a very natural choice for us, because it's like, just think about this, it's the exact reason why you want to do your your postdoc or even your PhD. It's like you chances are you want to have a tenure track position. Now you have it, right? Just take it. Okay, and the flip side is like, I don't think your supervisor will give you a hard time, because once you have like a tenure track position, you will be viewed as a part or a member, an essential member of our community, and you will be like maybe one of the future colleagues. May not be in the same university, but still you are part of our community, right? So yeah, so we'll do understand that part. So I don't think anyone, including your supervisor, will give you a hard time if you have to choose between finishing up your postdoc and taking the tenure track position. So it should be a natural choice. Okay. So yeah. So the next question, it's from Safira. So overall, I thought this was a super helpful data with lots of insight into pathways and things I can use moving forward in my education and career. Very hopeful or helpful data. Any specific indicators you can think of when looking for inclusion in a PSE? What is PSE? Or with a supervisor? So what's the meaning of PSE? Maybe I meant
Post-secondary education.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I'm not sure what you mean by inclusion, Safira. I don't know if you're able to add that in the chat. I think like, are we talking about like equity?
Equity and diversity issues, or
Yeah. Anyway, if I'm not sure if it's possible, if Safira is still listening and can add to that. If it is about that question of like equity, diversity, and inclusion, it's yes, okay, good. Yeah, it's hard to point to specific indicators, because even if you had like some quantitative data on the proportion of students that are, say racialized, or the gender balance of students in a particular program, might not tell you how actually supportive that program is. I think if you're comfortable, it's a fair question to ask of prospective supervisors and departments, is like, what proportion of your students are, say from equity seeking groups, or what supports are there for people like me in your program. You can talk to other students about it, about the program. We definitely don't have enough data in the survey to finger point at particular institutions and say you're doing a bad job of inclusion, but yeah, I think I would just ask questions. Those are perfectly reasonable questions to be asking, and they are questions that it's not just students that are interested. Departments are being asked. We just got a survey yesterday from the administration asking us about what we do to support students from equity seeking groups in our department. And so, we have to run through a list of all of the things we do, and the ways that we actively work to try and combat discrimination. So, a good department will have an answer to that. And if you don't get an answer, then maybe that's a pretty good indication that they're not thinking about it enough.
Yeah, exactly. So Alyssa, you want to add anything?
I don't have anything to add to that.
Okay,
I think Karen did a good job. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, just to add something which might be useful for Safria to understand this. So I think last year I was on the task force in UBC to do to analyze data from the racialized faculty survey during the COVID-19. So it's like the situation really varies. Even inside my university, it really varies a lot from faculty to faculty. Okay, we cannot really assume that it's like a faculty of science will face the same situation as the faculty of arts. So that's for sure. I would expect that situation will also vary a lot across different universities. So that would be my expectation. Another thing is like since I analyzed the data and I build regression models, it's like what surprised me is like most would be it's like the disadvantage of the female faculty members in this, because it's like one of the most significant burden might be it's like as female faculty members, the expectation is like you need to take care of family members. So if someone is sick in your family, it's like you need to take a leave and take care of your family members. And this is like there would be definitely something we should do about that. And and also it's not just about, because they have like very detailed categories, it's not just like it's like something in your side. It's like your parents, even if your in-laws are sick, you are supposed to take a leave. And often female faculty members, they tend to take leave and take care of their in-laws. So that's something we need to pay very special attention to. If we think about the equity and the inequality and diversity issues in the higher education setting. I think they have the full report already. I'm not sure, maybe someone UBC's website. Yeah, you could check that. I do not have the link right now, but I guess you could find the report. Okay. Yeah. Karen, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would just say, like, what you're talking about is evidence to support what I'm pretty sure is already happening, which is that universities are really taking equity, diversity, and inclusion seriously, and that it is like, I think faculties are being like, everything's coming together to ensure that we are trying to diversify in hiring and also in accepting students into programs. And so I think it's promising that the Academy is diversifying. Where I think there's probably still some gaps is in the supports. So it's getting, hopefully easier to get in the door. But what I'm seeing from my racialized colleagues is that they are overburdened with a lot of extra work, because they are the person who gets asked to do everything on committees, and to represent their particular community on every committee and in every event. And so it's a lot of work. There's a lot of extra burdens for this, like, first big push of more diverse people in academia. But I think it's slow progress, but it's good news and a reason to be hopeful.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it seems that maybe we do not have more questions at this stage. So if there is no questions, I guess maybe we could try to finish the session earlier. Yeah. And again, I do thank these two presenters who did wonderful work and also delivered this fascinating presentation, and to help graduate students to promote their career. And I wish you all have a good semester. Okay. And take care and stay safe. And I also thank Ms. Sherry Fox for her efforts in making this happen. Okay. And take care, everyone. That's the end of the session. Okay. So I look forward to having more sessions to promote